That's unfortunate. There's been no sound. Hi, guys. Welcome to Crossways. I forgot to unmute us. We're talking
Oh
about.
no.
This is interesting. Let's go ahead and start over. I got it. Let's go ahead and start over. I'm sorry.
No
There it
problem.
goes. So, welcome to the Crossways podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Germany, who has apparently no idea what he's doing tonight. But we're glad that you are here with us. I'm with my good friend and mentor, Ryan Fraser. He's a professor at Freed-Hardeman University. And we're going to be talking about gentleness this evening. But Ryan, I know we kind of already did this, but how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Man,
It's been a good day, beautiful day out here in West Tennessee.
that's wonderful. And I know as we've been talking about gentleness, and thank you, Anna, for letting us know there's no sound. For those of you who do not know, my wife and I are expecting our first child. We're super excited, if you can't tell. And but as we think before we got on here, we were talking about kindergarten cop. And as you know, Catherine and I are planning this new chapter in our life. It got me thinking, if I was bringing our future child to his or her first day of kindergarten, and I saw a person that looked like Arnold Schwarzenegger, would I feel like that would be a gentle teacher? Would I feel like, oh no, this could end up going poorly? I don't know how I would feel. And those who are watching, I kind of want to hear, especially you who are parents, how that would make you feel. Would you feel at ease? Would you feel like this would be a gentle person that could take care of your child? I don't know. Ryan, what you got for me?
Mm, man, I think about these images of people like uh, Schwarzenegger or Vin Diesel, these other just The
Yeah,
Rock,
yeah,
and I don't. My kids are grown now. Maybe I would actually enjoy them taking care of my grown kids now, but that might be a little bit disconcerting to see this muscle bound, fierce looking person that's supposed to speak kindly to my child. So
exactly.
it might not match up with the mental image of what I would think a good kindergarten teacher looks like.
And I wonder if and I think that kind of, and that's not what we'll be talking about, but I wonder if a lot of it also has to do with appearances really don't
Mm-hmm.
really indicate a person. And we're called to be gentle. We're called to have a good inside inner being. Our soul's supposed to be
Right.
like Christ. And perhaps our outward appearance, we can do that by our actions and how we carry ourselves. But we're told not to judge by appearances.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really plays a lot. Josh is here, and yes, I'm excited. Thanks for the congrats. But he's saying, it's not right, but my first instinct would be heavy skepticism. And and like you said, it's not right because
Yeah.
we how often we do judge based off of appearances. But as we're talking about gentleness, and I want us to think, more along the lines of maybe even people we don't expect might have gentleness, but we're all
Mm-hmm.
called to have gentleness. And as we've been unpacking the fruit of the spirit, and each week I guess each guest I've had on has become a parent. And I forgot which guest actually mentioned it specifically, that these characteristics don't just begin somewhere and end somewhere, and the other one picks up where it left off. It seems that
Mm-hmm.
all these characteristics are almost woven together to create one fruit, to kind of describe what it is to have the spirit living inside of us.
Right. Yeah. They're definitely, as I was kind of unpacking them in my head, just thinking about the conversation today, is how love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self control just are all so really interconnected, and
Yeah.
there's pieces to them that I mean you can't just completely differentiate them.
No.
So I think that is very very cool. Maybe even in the order in which they show up in Galatians, it almost seems to build, but I don't know.
It
Maybe I'm
almost
making too
builds,
much
but
out
then
of
it
that.
almost builds backwards. The
Yeah,
moment I
yeah,
think it was written in a specific order, then I say, well, then I could actually add in the opposite order, because then you have to have self control to have the others. So it's
that's
it's
right.
it's it's always interesting for us to think about. And as I was thinking about gentleness, I was like, okay, well, in order for us to be gentle with, guys, we talk about what gentleness actually is. What does
Hmm.
gentleness mean? One of the first things I think of is, well, being patient with others. Then I'm like, well,
Right.
patience is a fruit of the spirit, or is one of the characteristics. And I'm like, well, so I think that just, either I have a poor definition, or I think it proves what I hope is correct, is that they all do build on one another. You can't have one without the other, which also means you can't ignore some and expect to have the others.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah,
think that's really important. But
that's right.
yeah, but as we're talking about gentleness, and I will try to stab myself. I want us to think about some of the stories in the Bible where Jesus perhaps showed gentleness,
Hmm.
and especially in how he interacted. Because what I want tonight to be about is how we can show gentleness toward others. Because I think that's gentleness really is about how we interact with others. I'm not sure gentleness is how we interact with God. Perhaps we that could be a discussion, but I think it's more how God is gentle toward us, and how we should be gentle toward others. So as we think about that, I think how Jesus was gentle. Jesus wasn't always gentle,
Right.
but he showed his gentleness. One thing I wrote down, and I wanted to get some discussion on, is it seems time and time again. I mean, Jesus' disciples asked the most absurd questions, and spending so much time with Jesus, you would think they would have understood it, And Jesus, time and time again, was like, "Don't you get it by now?" But it
Hmm.
seems he showed gentleness with his disciples, but the people he didn't really show gentleness toward were the Pharisees.
Right.
And maybe you can help me out, and maybe those who are watching can help us out figure out, why would Jesus show gentleness toward one group but be less, I guess, likely, or less, or showed less often gentleness toward another.
Yeah. I mean, I also think, and it depends on which Pharisees you're speaking about. I
Yeah.
think about gentleness that Jesus showed to people like Nicodemus. I mean,
Yeah.
so I think, of course, he read their hearts and he knew, is
Hmm.
this person legitimately, um, are they legitimately interested in the kingdom, or are they here to try and entrap me?
Correct.
And so he could see through that ruse, and respond, to their heart, and really give them what they needed. Because, you think about being gentle and then rebuke as almost being two opposite things. But when we when we speak the truth, we do it in love. Sometimes it can come in the form of a rebuke,
Hmm.
depending on what our desire is for that person. Even the Pharisees and Sadducees, people trying to entrap Jesus, he still cared about their souls, and
Yeah.
so he gave them what they needed at the time. It seems, but and that is interesting. You think about, and I in kind of just wrapping my head around the topic for tonight, thinking about the meekness of Jesus. And
Hmm.
sometimes we conflate meekness and gentleness. They are very related, but they are two different things.
Hmm.
Meekness being more that attitude, gentleness more the action, and
Yeah.
how it comes out. But
I was
uh,
once described meekness as being knowing, I guess, having the ability to know when to
mm,
show compassion, or show maybe some mercy, and then
mm,
but also knowing when it's appropriate to show some more harshness. And I think here Jesus, with his disciples, they were coming from a place of, we want to understand, that they had a genuine, I guess, perspective. But the
sure.
Pharisees, and I like what Josh said here. He says he was harshest on the Pharisees, who were using the law of God to oppress
Mm,
God's people, as opposed to using it to lead them to a deeper understanding of who God was. And it was oftentimes the Pharisees who said, "We know everything,
right.
and we have no more room for growth." And Jesus said, "Oh, ho, ho, hold on. No. One, you have room for growth. Two,
Mm,
you're wrong." And
mm,
and and he came down on that because it became now a lack of respect for God. And they were using their power and their knowledge of the law, like Josh said, to oppress God's people. Bruce
mm.
said, "Meek and gentle, but very lawful, with order and expectation." Jesus
Sure.
said, "You know the law." And
Hmm.
because of that, he said, "I have higher expectations for you."
Sure.
And I think that's a form of gentleness, because not gentleness isn't always just saying, speaking real soft. Sometimes gentleness can, like you said, be giving people what they need in a
That's
way
right.
of motivation. I had a band teacher, and I think I brought this up either a week or two ago, and if I brought it up last week, I apologize for bringing it up so quickly or so back to back. But I was in band, and I had a private tutor who taught me throughout high school, and I could have gone as far as I wanted to in band, and I did not extend my, I guess, my music, I guess, life in college. But when I was in high school, I can remember very vividly the day, or I guess the private lesson day, where I had not really practiced at all
Mm,
the during the week. And I was talented enough for the stuff we were playing in class to really kind of just play it in class and not take it home. But the stuff I was preparing for the private lessons were much more difficult, and practicing for like all state tryouts and other pieces that she wanted me to
mm.
learn, which required practice because they were on a higher level. And I can remember at one point that day, she just told me, "You need to pack up, we're done." And she goes, and at this point she goes, uh, "If you're going to do this, I'm not going to teach you anymore, and I'm going to tell your mom to stop wasting my time and stop wasting her money."
Ouch.
And I felt super small, but she knew that I had respect for her, and she also knew that I hadn't practiced, and I was sight
Mm,
reading, something I should have been practicing for weeks.
hmm.
And she said, "This is unacceptable. I expect better from you." Now, was she gentle in the sense of holding my hand? Well, no. But she knew that here's what I need, and she wasn't rude. I
Sure.
think that's the difference between gentleness can be blunt, because she wasn't rude and she didn't say anything untrue and she didn't say anything hateful. And I
Mm.
think that's kind of where we need to be talking about is gentleness
I,
doesn't mean sugarcoating things.
it, it's got to do with the motivation behind it. What are we trying to? Are we trying to hurt this person, or are we trying to help this person?
Yeah.
Are we trying to wound them, or are we trying to help them be healed? And so um, Christ definitely, shows that he says that he is gentle and humble in heart, and you will
Yeah.
find rest for your souls. Um, but that doesn't make discipleship easy.
No.
But us being gentle means that having a gentle spirit, I think, also involves having a teachable spirit.
Absolutely.
And if we're unteachable or not entreatable, it's impossible for us to grow.
Yeah. And
So,
and I think and I wasn't a brand new student then.
mm-hmm,
I was probably a junior or senior. Now, when I got to be a senior, at one point she basically said, "You need to find someone who's more suited for." She didn't her I guess her natural instrument wasn't what I played, so it got to a point when she said, "I can't help you anymore." But I was probably a junior at that point. So,
hmm,
in high school, who had been playing for since fourth grade, so I can't do math. I'm not going to try. But, I think sometimes, when we think that I can respond that way and with that harshness or that
hmm,
bluntness with everybody. And it doesn't matter how young in the faith they are, and that's not gentle. And we
right,
can convince ourselves, well, I'm concerned about their soul, but in reality, it's really about us and saying you're wrong. And
Hmm.
if our motivation is to prove them wrong rather than to help them be transformed like Christ, then we lose that gentleness aspect.
And it's known how high to how to take that dial. It's like with my students in Freed. Sometimes I got to turn the dial up a little bit, as far as constructive criticism. But hopefully they know. Hopefully the relationship is there, that they know where I'm coming from, and I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm trying to challenge you, or trying to help you to grow. And so that the gentleness tied into the meekness too. Um, we could jump down somebody's throat, like your teacher could have just jumped down your throat, or given you what they thought. If I give enough confrontation, but give it at the level that Jonathan can handle it,
Mm-hmm.
this will spurn him on rather than
Oh yeah.
deflate him and discourage him.
I may or may not have went home and practiced for an hour or two. And
Yeah.
Caleb Sampson, and for those who are with us, he's also an admin on the page, and he put, as long as we say it with bless your heart, and and I think that's really funny, but as I'm looking at some of the scriptures, Paul said, with all humility and gentleness, with patience,
Mhm.
bearing with one another in love. So sometimes and that's that patience part that has to come with gentleness, because too often, especially with maybe those who aren't Christians, we say, and I don't understand why we think this, but we're almost surprised that non-Christians act like non-Christians.
Yeah.
Now, I can understand why we might be surprised that a Christian or someone who professes to be a Christ follower doesn't
Mm.
act like Christ, but that patience still has to be there, because you know if we are if we dial it up too much and we aren't gentle because we didn't think about our relationship that's already there, that teacher and I already had a very solid relationship. you
That's
know
key.
it's gonna turn them off, just like Paul wrote just a few verses later in Galatians, from this past, from the when he
Hmm.
mentioned the fruit of the Spirit. He says, if anyone's caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in what? A spirit of
Of
gentleness.
gentleness.
not
That's
not
right.
a and I can remember talking to an atheist friend of mine, and someone, actually, I think you and I both know from Freed Hardeman. And I asked her, and I had the relationship where I could say, I'm doing a blog post on how we can reach the lost and how we can,
Mm.
better reach, those who don't believe in God. I said, I want you to teach me. I said,
Mm.
what would
Hmm.
work and what doesn't work.
Mm.
You're kind of my target here. And I said, and I could be blunt enough with her to ask her that question. And I remember, and it's a long feedback, a long message she sent me. But part of it was, sometimes when we reach out to others, we try to do it from the perspective of trying to fix them and say, you're broken, let me fix you.
Mm.
And are fixing, oh no, you're doing all these bad things, let me stop you, rather than showing them Jesus and then making them fall in love with Jesus. And then she actually used the words, if we do, if we give them and show them the spirituality, she goes, the rest will follow.
Mm.
And she goes,
Interesting.
then
Yeah.
the actions will follow. If we show them who Jesus is, she goes, then we don't have, then the bad behavior will fix itself, because the motivation will be not, let me fix this, but let me please God.
Mm.
And I'm expounding on her words there, but that really kind of opened my eyes to also the gentleness. Are we doing it to win an argument, to say, haha, I caught you, you're wrong, I'm right? Or is it really about us showing them who Jesus is?
And in the process of showing who Jesus is, showing respect to that person.
Yeah.
I might totally disagree with them. And as a clinician, I have to work with clients all the time that, I don't agree with their perspective, but I've got to show unconditional positive regard, show that respect, that they're entitled. People are entitled to believe what they believe. And we've got to realize that, um, The only way in these verses that we're talking about, with Paul's teaching and trying to tell the brethren how do you share Christ with somebody, they're not going to listen to you if you come at them trying to win an argument.
Yeah.
It's got to be they can tell that you really care about them and that you respect them as a person and that you're willing to learn from them too. And so I love what you did, Jonathan, with an individual just showing an openness to, hey, I don't have all the answers on this, um, but maybe we can learn together and maybe learn something about Jesus together.
Yeah, and I kind of also said, it's obvious kind of our approaches right now aren't working. Because
Amen.
I said,
Yeah,
because that, well, we have this bad reputation. I said, why do we have this reputation? And, and
hmm
and I got some,
just
and
earned
and
it.
I think she even asked, do you want me to be, how blunt do you want me to be? And I was like, give it to me. She goes, this might be a long message. I said, I don't care.
hmm
And I think that's part of what James 1 says when he says, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man has not produced the righteousness of God. And
That's
when we
right.
think of that I guess, under the umbrella of gentleness, if we aren't listening to one another, we can't be gentle because then it's still about us.
Comes back to Proverbs. I was thinking Proverbs 15:1. A
I have that
gentle
down. Yep.
answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
Yep.
And there's a way that we can say things. As I think about this idea of gentleness, I think about the implied in it is there's a tenderness there. There's the tone in which we talk to people. There's, I think, just a temperance, restraint that we show, and that's empowered by the Holy Spirit. The Spirit gives us the power to respond as Christ would, without turning people off to Him because of us. We often get in the way of
Oh
the
yeah.
message.
And we all think another way because we quench the spirit because
hmm
the when doing what you just mentioned and doing other things that are spirit led is uncomfortable, and we don't like to be uncomfortable.
hmm
Whether it's listening to someone who has a different perspective than us, whether it means we're having to admit we've not listened before, whether we
Yeah,
have to admit we're wrong, and or whether we have to admit change has to happen. That's uncomfortable. And
it is. And we were talking before the podcast started. I don't want to get us too far off right now, but just in view of what's going on in our country,
absolutely.
um, leadership leadership always begins with listening.
Hmm.
Leadership begins with listening, and if we're not listening to people and trying to understand their perspective, there's no way that we're going to show a spirit of gentleness. There's no
Yeah.
way that we're going to develop peace. So Jesus says, "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." Um, that that's just showing that there's a tremendous power in a willingness to listen and a willingness to show that respect and show that care to people that are on the other side of the totally on the other side of the tracks from us, or on the other side
Yep.
of the political view.
Yep.
Um, it's impossible to have unity in the church
When you
without,
don't listening. Yeah.
you know,
And for those who are watching, we want your feedback here. You mentioned kind of what's going on in the world right now, Ryan, and you know for things in the world, these current events. We've been seeing some I would say some disturbing things, some
yeah,
things that are unsettling. And I don't know the answer, but and besides knowing that it does, but how can gentleness be applied to some of these current events? With the racial tensions we're seeing, with the just the inability with any issue to listen to people who have differing opinions than us. You know, right now, for example, there's a group of people who do feel hurt, that they
True.
feel neglected, maybe ignored, and they're saying, "You've not been listening."
True.
How can we use gentleness to say we love you? I mean, is
Mm,
it as simple as just saying we love you? I mean,
mm,
is it just as simple as how can we use that gentleness? And I don't have an answer right now. I've been thinking about it, and other
mm.
than to say I know it has to be applied somehow. And
It does. I grew up in South Africa. Some of y'all might know that. And I grew up during apartheid, during that time frame in the history there. And in fact, I was a student at Frida Hardeman when Nelson Mandela was finally released, and went through that process to try and bring reconciliation, racial reconciliation in South Africa. But what was necessary for that process, and it's still an ongoing process there.
yeah, for
But
sure.
what was necessary was open conversation about it, and also there had to be justice had to be part of
Yeah.
the equation as well. And I think that just where people feel like I've got a platform where I am being heard, where I am being taken seriously, and where there is an effort to for restitution and reconciliation. We've got to start somewhere, and we've got a long way to go in this country
We we,
still,
we
evidently.
We do. And we have some comments here. Josh is saying the ability to disagree with gentleness and respect and
Hmm.
continue in that posture turns the temperature down on that disagreement naturally. And I think that the key is continue. Because oftentimes we'll say, okay, I'll be gentle, I'll be respectful, I'll ask the question. And when they begin to give us an answer we are uncomfortable with,
Yeah.
the the fists come up and we say, okay, let's spar. My dad said sometimes we just have to sit in the ashes with them. I think about
Mm.
I think about Job's friends, and that it wasn't
Hmm.
really about. I mean, yes, it was about mourning Travesty, but they were the best friends for 7 days. they
Yes, and
when
they
when they
kept
opened,
quiet.
yeah, when they just said, okay, we see him literally in ashes and sackcloth, and they didn't recognize him,
Yeah.
and they sat down with him for 7 days and didn't say a word, and then they got in trouble because they started talking. But sitting in the ashes, you know, this continuing in that humbleness posture. Correct me if I'm wrong, but did something happen in Henderson lately with some kind of community event that
Yeah.
kind of helped out with that?
On Sunday, you're talking about on Sunday, there was afternoon or evening, there was
Yes,
a gathering at the high school
yes.
football field, and several. I wasn't able to be part of that, but I heard just several good comments about you know people sharing their heart and their concern, and I know President Shannon was one of the ones that spoke, and others.
Mm-hmm.
But just opening the conversation, doing it in humility, like you're sitting in the ashes with people,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that there's no quick and easy fixes to these things, but being willing to be uncomfortable together and saying, hey, let's not um, let's not move in opposite directions. Let's try to move towards each other, in a
Mm-hmm.
way that is open. Like Ephesians 4:2, be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love.
Mm-hmm.
That bearing process, and that's hard work. Gentleness is a hard work.
Yeah. We often think of gentleness as being passive,
Mm-mm.
but it's not. It's
No,
actually, I would say, the opposite.
it is because we're not only are we trying to put ourselves empathetically in that other person's shoes,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also restraining us, holding ourselves back, and keeping ourselves in check, because it's not about me and my rights. And we live in a country that's all about give me my rights, give me justice. Well, as believers, that's very countercultural for a Christian. A Christian's not about saying, "Give me my rights."
What did Paul
It's
say?
about how can I bring glory? Yeah, how can I bring glory to Christ?
Yeah, Paul said what, what things are lawful, but not all things build
Are
up,
beneficial.
are beneficial. And like you said, too often we get caught up in the, well, I have the right to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And now we can take it too far by saying, well, if it offends somebody, maybe it is not
Sure,
beneficial. And we can take that too far by then not doing anything. But
sure.
I think our fear of taking it too far has resulted in us not doing anything about it, and us going back to the "it's my right."
Mm-hmm.
And there's no, it's we almost live in a world of extremes. It's either one or the other, and Paul's saying it's both. You can have the right, but it doesn't mean you should always do it.
Don't always exert that right.
I like Star Trek somewhat. I'm not a huge Star Trek fan, but I think of Spock by saying just because it's there does not give you, it's not reason to climb the mountain, right? Sometimes we're
Mm,
like, oh, look, there it is. Well, I guess I'll have to climb it. We can always go around it, and I think sometimes, but with issues like we're facing now, there's a mountain of an issue, and right
sure.
now there is reason to climb it,
Mm-hmm.
and like my dad said, but acknowledging that it has to be fixed is important. Bruce is saying agree to disagree, and you have to be willing to compromise and have and give and take attitude, and sometimes that's true. We don't want to have a give and take attitude when it comes to truth, but when it comes to, hey, we have a disagreement, approaching it from the perspective of let's find a common ground is important.
Mm,
And the common
that's
ground right
right.
now should be everyone matters. And
Sure.
and unity matters. And with and maybe in regards to the spiritual things, Jesus matters. And as long as we're becoming more like Jesus, we've succeeded in life.
Mm.
But the moment we end up acting like ourselves is the moment I think we start to get in some hot water.
Amen. So the key here is don't act like yourself, especially you, Jonathan. Do not be yourself.
Oh, I'm sure many people would agree with that,
Oh
but
man, but
yeah,
that's that is our all joking aside. That our fleshly nature, and we're going back into the fruit of the spirit, because we know right before the fruit of the spirit are given, you got the works of the flesh, so the fleshly nature, and we're always combating that. And gentleness is one of the facets of the fruit that we're combating that fleshly nature, that give me mine,
yep,
selfish, self-centered, hateful attitude that we have or
yeah.
can easily have.
Oh, absolutely. And I think about when you know thinking of others and maybe in how we answer others. And I guess I'll end with we'll kind of end with this going back to Jesus and how Jesus showed gentleness, and then we'll tell our audience farewell. Because if our goal is to be transformed like Jesus and not live like the flesh and live as the Spirit guides us, and I brought this up in a previous podcast, but I kind of immediately thought of again the storm on the sea where
Mm,
Jesus' disciples were, and these weren't like, I guess, these weren't wimps. Sometimes we feel like they're wimps. Fishermen saw storms. They were used to, knowing to, you know, read the weather and know what was dangerous. If a little something popped up, they weren't like, okay, well, this will pass in a little bit. For this storm to make these fishermen feel like they were all going to die, it apparently popped out of nowhere. It caught fishermen off guard. They were terrified. All right, but they had also
Right.
been with Jesus, so should they have known that everything could have been okay? Well, Jesus kind of says that, but when they woke up Jesus, besides him saying, at the very beginning, why'd you wake me up? Like anybody, hey, okay, why'd you wake me up? When I wake my wife up, I get a very similar message, and
Hmm.
yeah, but
Right.
especially right now. But no, I'm just kidding. But when he asked that, and they said, "Don't you care that we're all gonna die?" He showed gentleness in the way of he didn't immediately chastise them and say, "Oh, you of little faith."
Right.
He addressed their concern and their fear, and then turned and said, "You should have known better."
Mm.
And I think if we
Good
take that
point.
approach with others, especially those who might should know better and those who don't know better, we address their fear or their concern to say, "I hear you.
Yeah.
There's a problem that needs to be fixed. I'm going to help you fix it, and then I'm going to tell you maybe your approach was wrong, or hey, let's put our you should have put your trust in God." That order is helpful. And I think if we follow Jesus' example, we'll see a little bit more unity in our world.
I love that because what you're saying, um, in my way of thinking, is just you're meeting people where they are
Yeah,
right now, and if you meet them where they are, and you address the immediate concern of that, the anxiety that's there,
yeah,
the tension, the anger, whatever it is that's there, and just address that, then that and stick with them and are patient with them, that allows through that spirit of gentleness to take it to the next step and maybe uh, build a build a positive relationship or a stronger relationship that points people again to the Lord.
definitely,
So,
definitely. Well, Ryan, it's been exciting to have you here tonight, and
well, thanks. It's been
yeah,
great.
for those who tuned in and who commented, thank you for being here. I'm glad that some of you are always here. Remember, we are here every Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. Behind me, you can see that we are brought to you by the Ministry League. We're also brought to you by Holly Hill Church of Christ. And I've been blessed to be here. In a couple weeks, I'll be here for 5 years. And so we're very happy.
Congratulations.
And of course, Ryan, thank you for your friendship, and I always enjoyed also your mentoring and your teaching at Freed Hardman. And
Thank you.
again, remember, and the Ministry League, we have all sorts of resources. A new video series was released a couple weeks ago called the Amplify series. It's a great tool, especially right now, for you to use with your groups, since lots of things are opening up slowly. But as always, remember to walk in the way of the cross.
Amen.